Basic psychology, attachment. Caregiver-infant interactions in humans. Caregiver-infant interactions in humans. Sarah, did you know that nonverbal communication between caregivers and infants is crucial in forming attachment?
Really? How does that work?
It's believed that the manner in which caregivers respond to infants through how sensitive they are to one another's signals determines the formation of attachment and how deep the relationship is.
That's fascinating. What role does reciprocity play in this?
Reciprocity occurs between infants and caregivers, resulting in mutual behavior, where both parties are able to generate a response from one another almost like a conversation. This facilitates and strengthens the attachment bond.
I see. And what about interactional synchrony?
Interactional synchrony involves infants imitating specific hand and facial gestures from an adult model, and broadly refers to a finely tuned coordination of behaviors between the child and parent during speaking and listening. This develops into a flow of mutual behaviors, and a shared sense of timing and rhythm between the infant and parent.
That's amazing. Is this behavior learned or innate?
Meltzoff and Moore, 1983, demonstrated that interactional synchrony occurred with infants imitating facial expressions, tongue protrusions, and mouth openings from an adult model when only 3 days old. This suggests the behavior was innate rather than learned. Reciprocity and interactional synchrony evaluation. Reciprocity and interactional synchrony are important concepts in caregiver-infant interactions. They help form attachment bonds between the two. However, observing infant behavior is challenging as their facial expressions are continually changing.
Why is that a problem?
It makes it difficult to distinguish between general behavior and actual interactional synchrony. Therefore, such theories may lack internal validity due to not necessarily measuring interactional synchrony.
That makes sense. What about the Meltzoff and Moore study?
Their study lacks reliability as successive attempts to replicate the findings have failed. For example, Kepke et al., 1983, was unable to recreate the same findings. However, one practical application for such findings is mothers can be placed in the same rooms with their children instantly, so they can begin to form attachment bonds unlike previous practice where they were kept separate.
Interesting. What about the cross-cultural support for interactional synchrony?
Interactional synchrony does not have cross-cultural support, which weakens the idea that it is innate and necessary for attachment as it is not universal. Levine et al., 1994, found that Kenyan mothers had little interactions with their infants, yet a high proportion of them were still classed as securely attached.
I see. What about the behavior of infants in response to human interactions?
Condon and Sander, 1974, analyzed infant video recordings to find they did coordinate their behavior in sequence with the adult speech, almost as if it were a conversation involving taking turns. This supports the idea of interactional synchrony having validity, as Isabella et al., 1989, also found that infants with secure attachments also demonstrated such behavior in their first year. Stages of attachment identified by Schaffer. According to Schaffer, there are 4 stages of attachment. The first stage is the indiscriminate attachment stage, which lasts from birth until approximately 2 months. During this stage, infants produce similar responses to all objects, regardless of whether they are inanimate or not.
What happens in the second stage?
The second stage is the attachment begins stage, which occurs between 2 to 6 months. Babies become more sociable and able to distinguish people with a preference for their company over inanimate objects. They do not display stranger anxiety and allow themselves to be comforted by anyone.
What about the third stage?
The third stage is the discriminate attachment stage, which takes place from 7 months. Babies begin to display separation anxiety from their main attachment figure through protesting when separated. They also begin to show stranger anxiety and a sense of relief and joy when reunited with their primary caregiver, showing a specific attachment towards them.
And the final stage?
The final stage is the multiple attachment stage, which occurs from around 10 months onwards. The infant displays multiple attachment behaviors to many people within their social circles, such as siblings, the other parent, grandparents, and even nursery minders. Schaffer and Emerson found that 78% of infants at 6 months had multiple attachments, and almost all displayed multiple attachments at the age of 1 year. Evaluating Schaffer's stages of attachment. Schaffer's stages of attachment is a model that explains how infants develop attachments to their primary caregiver. However, there are some weaknesses in the research. For example, the data collected may not be reliable due to demand characteristics.
What do you mean by demand characteristics?
Demand characteristics occur when participants in a study change their behavior to match what they think the researcher wants to see. This could have affected the data collected in Schaffer and Emerson's study on attachment.
That's interesting. What other weaknesses are there?
Another weakness is that the study was conducted in the 1960s, and the findings may not be valid in today's world where mothers often work outside the home. Also, the study may be culturally biased towards Western cultures.
Wow, I had no idea. What are some examples of cultures that the model may not apply to?
Research by Sagi et al. Suggests that the model may not apply to collectivist cultures, where infants are raised in communal settings rather than with individual caregivers. This means that the 4-stage model may only apply to Western individualistic cultures.
That's really insightful. What other research challenges the 4-stage model?
Research by Carpenter found that infants as young as 2 weeks old recognize their mother's voice and face, contradicting the initial stage of Schaffer's model. This suggests that the model may not be entirely accurate.